All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to another one of Platform's webinars. As we've been returning back to school over this summer and fall, we've been excited to share different insights and experiences from folks like Ian, who's joining us today, as well as many other educators from across the country. Today, we'll be revisiting integrating technology in PE, preparing for the new year, and also just sort of expanding into the new year, as we know many folks have already kicked off. Just what to expect a little bit from a high level. We'll dive into a few slides, take a little bit of a deeper dive into some technology examples, and then we'll be sending everyone a recording as well as the slides after today's presentation. So before we get started with the meat and potatoes of today's presentation, Ian, why don't we just start off by introducing yourself? You'll be joining us and really kind of being the quarterback of today's presentation. So if you wouldn't mind just giving the folks joining us a little bit of background of your role at Platform and what we'll be likely talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And Doug, thanks for having me on. I think just to kind of kick things off, as you mentioned, for those that don't know me or haven't have been on one of these webinars before, I am the Director of School Partnerships at Platform, and I've been here for almost 5 years. And part of my job is the unique opportunity to work very closely with PE departments all across the country who have lots of the same, but also very different challenges and experiences. So being able to work with them and empower them to provide a really high quality experience to students all around the world, or all around the country, I should say, is definitely a really unique part of my job. And in my free time, I'm also a football coach and strength coach down the road at a local high school as well. So really excited to talk to you guys. And I think as we've come into what is still a little bit of a different year, we've just seen some themes around technology and the role that it can and should play, especially coming off of a year where many were remote and hybrid. So really excited to talk to you all about that theme in particular, and share some best practices and some things that I've seen and heard along the way.
Awesome. And so you've already sort of outlined the agenda itself, and we can sort of jump to that preview. We'll be looking into some of those things and how it works within schools. As you mentioned, right now, you're working with schools on a number of different levels, both to kick off Platform or think about using technology, or just spending time talking about some just simple ways that they can think about integrating new ideas, new curriculum, video resources, things along those lines. So as you mentioned, this is sort of the agenda for today. Anything else to expect you want to touch on, Ian, here before we dive into a little bit more?
No, I think this is good. I'm ready to dive in.
All right, awesome. So from there, obviously, as we kind of approach this presentation and many of our presentations, we want to unpack what PE teachers have to, juggle and face along a school year. And as you were planning for this presentation, a lot of these different ideas you've sort of dragged out or from a lot of your conversations with teachers going into the new school year. So talk us through what you've been coming across and, some of those things that PE teachers right now are facing and getting ready and trying to implement sort of curriculum and programming in 2021.
Yeah, of course. And I think even before the pandemic, what became increasingly clear was just how difficult it is in today's day and age to be a physical education teacher. And I say that for a number of reasons, many of which you can see here on the screen. But I use the analogy with a lot of departments that I think they certainly agree with, that a lot of science teachers or math teachers will teach one subject, geometry or algebra or what have you, whereas physical education has now been tasked with a whole host of very different and varied themes and domains. So for example, the skills and the games, I think, was always a staple of physical education, but nutrition and health and yoga and mindfulness and social emotional learning, dance, fitness, weight training, all of the different topics and areas that are being asked of teachers to expose kids to, I think just makes it really challenging to be a master at all of those different trades. And beyond that, whereas I think in some states and in some departments or some schools, I should say, you might just have freshmen in your classes, or you might just have sophomores in your classes. But there are a lot of schools based on scheduling constraints and lots of other reasons that a lot of teachers are faced with grades, 10 through 12 all in one class, or 9 through 12, or 7 through 12, for example. So having to meet kids at wildly different levels, both physically, mentally, and even emotionally, I think is really challenging thing to be able to do. And beyond that, sometimes the space is limited. You might not have a a large area, or you can't go outside because it's the winter, or you have to share with other classes, or the weight room is really small, you don't have a lot of equipment. So just the general infrastructure can be difficult. And then of course, the COVID restrictions on top of all of that, with trying to still meet the state standards and report and track progress and provide grades that are substantiated with data. There's just a lot on the plate of physical education teachers. And I think that COVID helped underscore, as everyone went virtual, just how much there is, and just how challenging it can be to try to do that effectively, day in, day out, year in, year out. So I think that's sort of the state of physical education as it exists right now from what I've heard.
Yeah, and I think we're all feeling that in different ways. But one of the things that you mentioned is each school is going to be a little bit different. And we're always well aware of that going into any of these webinars, knowing that, hopefully we're giving different insights that people can grab from and pull apart from and everything else like that. And if people do have specific questions or want to unpack one of these things more than other, we're always welcome to kind of chat about those in the chat function or anything else like that. Because like you mentioned, each school sort of navigating things a little bit differently. No two schools and no two PE departments are totally alike, but there are definitely some common themes that we can pull out. One of them that you mentioned is COVID restrictions and sort of COVID just in general. Talk us through what you've noticed over the last year, both kind of in the thralls of COVID, what it was like kind of, last year, but now also coming out of things and starting to think about, all right, COVID's still here. It's still impacting us, but we're also looking at things in a few different ways. So how has COVID sort of played into PE as we move into 2021 as well?
Yeah, I think we could do a whole presentation on some of the difficulties around teaching physical education through a computer. But I think there are a few silver linings, and one of them is certainly the infrastructure at schools. I think there were a lot of districts that had a difficult time with connectivity or bandwidth or Wi-Fi. And I think that due to necessity, as some kids are still at home, or even during the hybrid year that was last school year, a lot of schools fortified their infrastructure. And I think that has a long-lasting impact for those teachers that might have wanted to use technology or wanted to explore different ways to move digital with some of their curriculum. This now gives them the opportunity to do so. And to that point, I think there was also quite a spike in the number of devices that are now available for students, whereas a lot of school districts already had something like that in place. We've seen that grow quite a bit, so that most students now have some school-issued device that they can utilize in and out of the classroom, which just further enables the pivot to technology, for some schools and some teachers. Of course, as everyone is familiar with, this year, though many are back in person, there are still cohorts or virtual schools that are at home or doing some type of hybrid model. So I know that there's a whole different way, a lot of different ways that that's approached at different schools, but that is still felt by some to have to be able to provide collateral and resources and materials for those that are not physically present in person. And then, of course, the Delta variant, I think, is still an unknown, but there are schools that we've already seen, going back to a hybrid model or having to alter their plan that they set forth at the beginning of the school year. So I think that bears monitoring. But all of this over the past 18 months has definitely, to me, helped make very clear just how important PE is, and as a subject that often gets tasked with the lion's share of physical, mental, and emotional well-being. I think that a lot of schools and districts are starting to realize just how important of a role physical education plays beyond the maybe misconceptions of games and skills only, but that entire picture that PE supports, I think, has been brought to the light and emphasized more within some districts.
Sure. And I think one of the things, as you mentioned, with the spike in one-to-one devices in collaboration with sort of the emphasis on PE, is this new sort of opportunities that some PE teachers have been able to take advantage of, not just through PE budgets, but technology budgets, curriculum budgets, thinking about ways differently, so that it used to feel like something that, hey, PE sort of off to the side. It's something that's kind of left to their own accord and navigating it. But as you mentioned, in a lot of ways, COVID's almost allowed PE to become integrated into school even more so, as it should be. And because a lot of that, came from this importance and significance of PE and how it plays kind of on the mental and physical aspects of our students. So from there, because of that, there have been new opportunities and ways that teachers have been thinking about technology. One of the things, as we often run into, is, it makes sense in math or science or some of the quote unquote core subjects to integrate technology in certain ways. But when we're talking about starting to move and do fitness and everything else like that, we get a little bit maybe nervous or skeptical of technology. So how do we position technology as a tool and not a toy when it comes to using it as a PE, department or PE teacher?
Yeah, and this is something that I get every day. This is a question that is sort of omnipresent throughout physical education. I think an appetite to explore and experiment with technology, but also a bit of an aversion, just knowing that this is a physical activity rooted subject. Sometimes it might seem a little counterintuitive. So I think at a high level, a lot of teachers or departments feel as though they're giving up control when they incorporate technology. And I would argue just the opposite, that you're actually gaining control. And I'll touch on that in a moment. But to your point, Doug, I think just creating and really communicating the purpose behind technology and having a good reason for it, and not just trying to sort of aimlessly or just sort of put it together and use technology because you feel like you should be. I think there needs to be a real good reason to do so. And I think some of those good reasons include the idea that you can allow your kids to collaborate and even do some peer-to-peer teaching in some cases. So if you have some of those mixed classes and you have a freshman and a senior who are both in your class for 45 minutes with very different goals, very different abilities, very different experiences, I think the ability to digitally provide some of that personalization and feedback is invaluable and maybe worth exploring if that makes sense based on your class setup. But beyond that, some of the assessment and the progress tracking that you can do, and just making things a bit more streamlined, a bit more clear so that the kids can get good feedback and kind of know where they stand and use that as a motivator to, try to set and meet goals that you might have within your curriculum. So, the idea that you can collaborate, you can personalize, you can track, I think just brings to light some of the benefits that you have when it comes to technology and physical education. And there are many more, but, as far as some of the themes that I hear, at least entering this school year, those are some of the ones that really stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. And so with that, and trying to think about sort of different ways that technology can be used within PE in particular, one of the ways obviously is you work with schools and introducing them to different tools. Often you'll connect with folks and show them a little bit more about platform. What's sort of the high level you want to just start to level set with what platform is before we dive into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of like actually incorporating that technology into classroom in different ways?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are lots of technologies that I'm sure many of you have explored in the past and continue to explore. Platform is one that is designed primarily for secondary schools. And as you can see with some of these bullet points, I think it, to me, boils down to three main themes or benefits. We have a team of instructors that have created really high quality, age appropriate, and professional content for all types of students, grades 6 through 12. So from nutrition to yoga to fitness to weight training to mindfulness and everything in between, there is a lot of pre-made material that you can utilize and pull from as an instructor. Beyond that, the technology that supports all of that, from the delivery of personalized programs to the tracking of students' progress, that is sort of the bedrock to everything. And then something that we're really proud that we've helped create and cultivate and continue to facilitate is the idea of a community. And so we have physical education teachers from all across the country who use the program in drastically different ways, but will come together and share best practices, talk about some of the experiences that they're having, and just find motivation to continue to improve and explore new ways to benefit students, because I think that's ultimately why we're all here doing what we do. And so having the community to tie everything together is something that we feel really strongly about and lucky to be a part of.
Sure. Awesome. And just like you talked about, there are a lot of different ways that, PE happens within the classroom in any given day based off of your school and your setting. Same goes for how you then utilize different technologies and things along those lines. So we'll transition now into taking a little bit of a closer look. So Ian, I'll let you share your screen and sort of take over the sticks, and we can take a deeper dive into that. And then we'll kind of wrap up after you do this with some questions if anybody has them, and circle back on anything else.
Absolutely. So I'll just mention that what you're looking at right now is sort of just a dummy account. So if you were a teacher who signed up with Platform, this is precisely what you would see. And I should also begin just by noting that there are really no two schools that use Platform in the exact same manner. So we've talked a lot about schools of different sizes and shapes and curriculums and standards. That is exactly how you should think about Platform, something that is very amorphous and can be molded to what you need it to do for you. And so, starting with some of the instructional content that I mentioned earlier, and just talking a bit about how you can utilize technology on a very small scale or really ramp it up and have it be a big part of what you do. So, as you can see, there are some different program levels that our instructors have created, from beginner to intermediate and advanced. And just when it comes to using some of the technology available, starting very simple, let's just take a module like Intro to Fitness Part 1. So as you can see, there are different sections and lessons within each that you can pull from as a teacher. So maybe you say, hey, I don't really want to use technology or devices, at least initially, as I get to know the kids in the first semester or first quarter. Well, you can take these lessons and you can use some of this written text and some of these videos to support your own teaching and instructing in the class setting. So think of this more as a lesson plan for you to just pick and choose movements, language, coaching cues, scaling options that you find to be suitable for your students. So this is just a nice teacher-facing resource that you can utilize as a part of your preparation for classes. If you wanted to take it one step further, maybe you were to find a specific movement or movements each day, like the air squat, that you want to emphasize. Well, you could copy this link, you could paste that and put it into Google Classroom or Canvas or any other learning management system. We're very compatible with many of the LMSs out there. So you might want to take it one step further and airplay this or put it on a projector. Watch this video, in this case, 4 minutes and 39 seconds, a really good high-level introductory overview to a pretty essential body weight movement. This is something that you could watch as a group, talk about it, and then go have students work in small groups and move on with the class. So from just using it for your own benefit to taking a video and sending it to kids who are virtual or posting it on the board, those are some ways you can start to think about using Platform or using technology, but in a very limited manner. Now, if you wanted to go one step further, you could assign any one of these programs. So maybe it's Intro to Fitness, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's nutrition, or you want to get the kids starting to do things like dance fitness or intro to weight training, or you have some older kids in weights classes who are doing an off-season program or personal fitness or what have you. You can assign those programs to the students so that they can pull up on their device anything that you've made available to them. So they wouldn't see any of these programs until you decided what you wanted them to see. But the benefit here is that within one period for class, if you wanted to go sort of the personalized device option, you would be able to ensure that kids had maybe a couple of different programs or modules that they could choose from based on what they're interested in, what they're capable of, and what makes sense for them. So that's just one option, going from, I'm just going to use this as a teacher, I'm just going to show a video or two, I'm going to deliver the entire program to the students and allow them to work through it on their own device. So there are definitely layers or levels to how that could work or operate. And beyond that, to take that one step further, there is a video library. So separate from any program or module, this can be more so thought of as a YouTube-like library. So you would be able to just search specific exercises that will have both a video and a really nice written description. So this could be a way for you to, if you were preparing to teach the kids how to do a pull-up, and there's a lot of kids that can't do a pull-up. So you might type in pull-up and talk through or look through some of the scaling options. What are some of the ways that we can still give kids that pulling stimulus without actually doing it from the bar? So yes, if you can do it like this coach is doing here, that's wonderful. But if not, what are some ways that we could possibly incorporate a band to make that a little bit easier? Or maybe if we have a barbell, we could do some, inverted row pulling, or we could use some rings, right? So just going through the progressions that might help you meet kids where they're at. Even if they're all doing the same program, they might need some personalized instruction and some help. So just a way to empower you with the tools to feel comfortable to really give kids that personalized instruction, whether or not they're all using their devices or you're still distributing and disseminating the information to them at the front of the class. So I think there are a lot of ways to go about using technology, and some schools will take these videos and put them into Edpuzzle or some other technology that will allow them to splice it up and assign questions and make it really interactive. So you can get pretty creative with the more than 1,000 videos that exist in here. So you certainly have some flexibility depending on what it is that you want to do and how you want to use it. And then if you are in the sort of upper tier of folks who want to get pretty techie, for lack of a better term, being able to start to compile and aggregate and utilize data that's available to you, I think becomes pretty powerful. So for any given day or week, you can take a look at a specific class and see, who did what, who logged tests today. 29 kids entered their 1 mile run score. I want to go in and I want to see who logged what, whether it was better or worse than last time, how we're trending as a class. So you start to have a wealth of information that is available to you in ways that you can utilize if you want to make sure that you're meeting standards, if you need to show FitGram pre and post test. Again, every school does it a little bit differently, but I think the power of the information and the data and the ability to track kids based on what program they're doing or what weight they should have been lifting or what they logged for certain tests becomes pretty powerful, depending on how you want to use it. So, just to kind of take things all the way back, there are lots of programs, but you can use them in a lot of different ways. So what I find a lot of schools do very successfully is start very small. Maybe I do just want to pull some of the videos or some of the content and deliver it in a way that I feel comfortable through your own LMS, verbally, print out some of the nutrition quizzes. You can do that how you'd like to, and then over time, you can put some kids into the system. And for some of those, more advanced programs, having the personalization and being able to meet each kid where they are and adapt based on how they're performing and progressing, I think becomes a nice tool to have at your disposal. And some schools really enjoy the ability to create their own programs. So if you wanted to build your own programs, but still use our videos or even use your own that you upload into the system, you have flexibility to create your own programs. You can also edit or copy any of ours. So, we just want to empower you to have great resources and great materials to use and deliver to your kids how you see fit. And I think for a lot of schools, putting technology on a pedestal is pretty natural. It can feel intimidating. It can feel a bit out of your comfort zone. But, what I tell a lot of folks is start small, get comfortable with doing what you're doing, and then you can look to explore and expand. And, maybe halfway through the year, you find your sweet spot. And so having a purpose, having a good reason to use technology, I think is paramount. And I think Platform provides enough value in a lot of the different ways that it's used to warrant exploring and seeing if it's something that works for you and works for schools, along with everything else that they have planned for the school year. So I think that's probably a good place to stop. I don't want to overwhelm anyone with information, but if there are questions or areas or topics that folks would like to discuss more, I'm more than happy to continue and expand upon what I've presented to this point.
Awesome. So we'll pause there and just be on the lookout for any questions. If folks want to use the chat, they're more than welcome to use the chat. They can also use the Q&A button down at the top. All right, one question, Ian, coming through that we get a lot in terms of what types of devices people will typically use. Do you mind walking through, if schools find themselves using students' phones, or do they try to make access or, available more like tablets or laptops? What do you think most people are using out there in terms of different types of devices?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as with everything when it comes to platform, there is no wrong answer. So some schools are comfortable with students using their phones and say, hey, they have them on them anyway. I'm comfortable taking advantage of this and making it a tool. Other schools, and I think slightly more popular, would be, Chromebooks or tablets or iPads or some type of school issued device. I think is pretty popular. I know that the school typically, when gathering funding for these types of devices, want to make sure they're being used. So being able to put them into action is certainly important. So we see that quite a bit. And there's also a feature within platform that allows up to 5 students to share one device. And that's called Rack View. And I think a lot of schools really enjoy being able to use school issued devices, but do so within small groups. So for every 3 or 4 kids, maybe you have one device. So if you've got 25 kids, you're probably talking about maybe 6 or 7 devices instead of 25. So no wrong way to do it. We see a little bit of everything, but I think school issued devices or Chromebooks and used collaboratively is a really successful way that we've seen it implemented many times.
Sure. And I know you mentioned, obviously you use this with kids that you work with and students and student athletes you work with. What are some of the ways that you usually try to like mitigate kids potentially getting distracted? Obviously, it's not one of those things that we're going to pretend doesn't happen at all. But what are some skills or strategies you've picked up or seen other teachers pick up and coaches pick up along the way in terms of, helping to address some of those distractions, be it going on to other websites or anything else like that while they are in the fitness center or weight room or wherever else they might be using it?
Yeah, and if that's something that worries you as a teacher, I think that's where the school issued devices are a really nice way to go about things, because a lot of times, by nature of them being issued by the school, Snapchat and Instagram are just not accessible from those types of tablets or devices. I also think that viewing the device is something that the kids are using at times during the class, but not only using is important. They shouldn't really be glued to it. It's there as a resource, it's there as a guide, but it's not in place of the teacher or doing the actual assignment or work or what have you. So being pretty intentional about setting expectations about what the relationship should be with the device, during class, I think is really important. But ultimately, you can kind of scale back depending on, what your comfort level is. If you want to just start with putting some videos on the TV and keeping devices out of the facility, that's fine. You can kind of build some trust and, build some confidence in using the program before you jump right in. So I think there's a lot of methods, and it just depends on the group of kids you have and your overall comfort level.
Sure. Awesome. Any other questions that people have, feel free to do so, post in the chat. And then Ian, maybe you can put up that final slide just with your contact info in case anybody wants to get a hold of you directly. We'll be sending this as a recording, as well as with Ian's contact info. You can feel free to reach out to him and check in, be it big or small questions. Always happy to sort of help out as you do navigate these different types of things. Perfect. Awesome. All right. Anything else, Ian, before we wrap up that you want to close with, or we haven't quite touched on yet before we sort of let folks off to wrap up the rest of their day?
I think that was good. I appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy days. I know beginning of school is usually a busy time. So thank you for joining. My info is listed below. If you have some questions, we'd love to chat. And hopefully I'll be hearing from some of you soon.
Awesome. Like Ian said, thanks everybody so much for joining. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules. Be on the lookout. We will be hosting a few more webinars in the coming weeks, one on yoga with our yoga instructor, Lulu, as well as another one in a few weeks with our nutrition expert, Rebecca Toutant. So we have a full slate of different types of webinars with different types of topics that we'll be looking to touch on throughout the month of September. We're excited for that one next week, as well as the following week with both yoga and nutrition. If there's anything else that you do want to check out in the form of a webinar, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always open to ideas and want to make sure that we keep these topics as relevant to all of you as teachers as possible. So thanks again for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch in the coming weeks with more webinars to come.
Thanks, everyone.